Samuel Carter, 72, walked the cracked sidewalks of Eldridge, Ohio, with a rhythm born of decades, each step deliberate, his weathered oak cane tapping like a metronome against the concrete. His faded green beret patch, stitched into a worn jacket, caught the morning light, a quiet testament to a life spent in shadows for a country that didn't always see him. Sam had grown up in segregated Alabama, where separate but equal was a lie etched into schoolhouse doors. At 18, he enlisted in the army to escape the weight of poverty and prejudice, only to find both waiting in different forms on battlefields from Vietnam to the Persian Gulf. A Green Beret, he led covert missions with a calm that unnerved even his enemies, earning commendations that never made it to public record. His son, Marcus, followed in his boots, only to fall in Iraq at 21, leaving Sam with a grief he carried like a second skin. Now, he mentored kids at the local community center, teaching them to stand tall despite a world that often pushed them down. This morning, Sam was headed to a veterans meeting at the Eldridge VFW Hall, his cane steadying him against the ache in his knees. The sun hadn't yet burned off the Ohio chill, and Lincoln Square buzzed with early commuters and coffee carts. Sam's eyes, sharp despite the years, scanned the street, not for threats, but out of habit. He didn't notice Officer Daniel Hayes, 38, stepping out of a patrol car, his sunglasses reflecting the square like a man hunting for trouble rather than peace. "Hey, old-timer." Hayes's voice cut through the morning hum, loud enough to draw stares from a nearby bench. Sam paused, his cane still, his expression unreadable. Hayes, a former high school linebacker who never made it past the minors, had joined the Eldridge PD to chase the respect his father, a disgraced cop, never earned. His broad frame loomed as he approached, badge glinting like a challenge. "That patch supposed to mean something? You some kind of war hero knitting medals in a nursing home?" A few passers-by snickered, but Sam's gaze didn't waver. He raised one eyebrow, a silent question. "Is that all you've got?" Hayes's smirk twisted. "Wrong move, Grandpa." He grabbed Sam's wrist, twisting it with a crack that echoed across the square. The cuffs snapped on, biting into Sam's skin until a thin line of blood trickled down his fingers. Sam's knees buckled slightly, but he didn't cry out. His silence was a choice, forged in jungles and deserts where noise meant death. Hayes, emboldened by the crowd's hesitation, kicked Sam's cane, splitting it in two. The wood skittered into the gutter, soaked in the memory of a man who'd walked through fire. A woman's voice broke the quiet, sharp and trembling. "He saved my brother in Vietnam." Mrs. Clara Evans, 68, clutched her tote bag, her white hair framing a face fierce with indignation. Hayes turned, hand hovering near his taser. "Ma'am, step back, or you're next." Clara froze, her fury a live wire, but she didn't retreat. A rookie officer, badge still shiny, took a half step forward. "Sir, maybe we should," Hayes cut him off. "One more word, and you're writing tickets for life." The rookie's jaw tightened, his eyes on the blood pooling at Sam's wrist. Sam stared at the broken cane, not in defeat but in recognition. It wasn't just wood, it was the weight of his son's uncelebrated grave, the promises he'd made to keep mentoring, to keep standing. The square fell silent, phones trembling in bystanders' hands as they filmed. Sam felt the sting of humiliation, but it wasn't new. He'd felt it when his son's death was reduced to a footnote, when his own medals were questioned because of his skin. Yet he stood, not for himself, but for Marcus, for the kids he taught, for the truth he refused to let bleed out on this sidewalk. His silence wasn't surrender, it was a weapon, honed over decades, waiting for the world to catch up. Mia Torres, 16, stood at the edge of Lincoln Square, her phone shaking in her hands as she recorded Officer Hayes cuffing Samuel Carter. Her dark eyes, framed by a hoodie, caught every detail, the crack of the cane, the blood on Sam's wrist, Clara Evans's cry. Mia's mother, a nurse who worked double shifts, had raised her to notice the world's edges, where people like them often stood. Her uncle, a Gulf War veteran, filled her with stories of resilience, fueling her dream to become a journalist. This moment, raw and wrong, felt like the story she was born to tell. Mia uploaded the 16-second clip from her phone, her fingers trembling over the caption, "This is what they call justice." By the time she reached the bus stop, the video had 5,000 views. Hashtags erupted, #HonorNotHate, #StandWithSam, spreading like wildfire across X, TikTok, and Instagram. A Discord thread traced her IP, sparking rumors of a federal leak, but Mia didn't care. She felt a surge of purpose, tinged with fear as her school's office got calls, some supportive, others threatening. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "Truth costs, Mia. Pay it anyway." Across town, the video hit Channel 7, a local station run out of a strip mall. Anchor Emily Nguyen, 34, daughter of a Vietnam War refugee, saw the clip in the editing bay. Her father had taught her the cost of silence, his own scars hidden under pressed shirts. When the station manager suggested leading with a weather report, Emily tore up the script. "We lead with this," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. On air, she introduced the clip not as a journalist but as a daughter. "This isn't just an arrest. It's a betrayal of what we owe men like him." The broadcast hit Eldridge like a shockwave. In a diner, forks paused mid-bite. At a VFW post, veterans whispered Sam's name, their voices thick with shared memory. Social media exploded, 8 million views by nightfall. A retired Marine posted, "That's Sam Carter. He pulled my squad out of an ambush in '71. This ain't right." Another user leaked Hayes's file, 3 complaints for excessive force, all buried. The comments turned sharp, cutting through the precinct's polished statements. Mia watched the numbers climb, her heart racing. She felt exposed, her name now tied to a movement she hadn't meant to start. Yet she also felt seen, her anger at a system that dismissed people like her uncle now shared by thousands. The video wasn't just evidence, it was a mirror, reflecting a town's shame and a veteran's unbroken spirit. As Mia boarded the bus home, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, "You gave him a voice. Keep going." She didn't know it was from a veteran who'd served under Sam, but it lit a fire in her chest, a resolve to keep telling stories that made the world pause. At 9:48 p.m., 400 meters from the Eldridge precinct, a gray building with no signage hummed with quiet urgency. Room 4B, Sublevel 2, Quantico, a place known only to a handful, lit up with a blinking terminal. Agent Laura Bennett, 42, stood before it, her sharp suit a stark contrast to the sterile room. A former military intelligence officer, Laura had lost a mentor to systemic bias in the Army, a black sergeant sidelined for speaking out. That loss drove her to the FBI, where she vowed to protect those the system overlooked. Now, her fingers hovered over a biometric scanner, her pulse quick with a mix of duty and fury. The screen flashed, Ellis, Thomas V replaced with Carter, Samuel J. A grainy photo loaded, Sam in his 30s, in desert fatigues, briefing generals with a gaze that didn't ask for permission. The file marked him as a Green Beret, later a civilian consultant with IM-2 clearance, tied to operations redacted under presidential seal. A line in red caught Laura's breath, "Subject not to be detained without federal oversight. Violation triggers immediate escalation." She felt a stab of guilt, she'd sworn to protect men like Sam, yet here he was, cuffed by a system she served. Laura keyed in the escalation code, ACC, Active Consultant Escalation. Within minutes, 3 black SUVs rolled toward Eldridge, no sirens, just precision. Laura led the team, her face unreadable as they entered the precinct. The air shifted, officers freezing under her gaze. "Who's Hayes?" she asked, her voice ablade. Daniel Hayes stepped forward, his confidence faltering. Laura didn't explain, her badge was the answer. She felt a quiet rage, not just at Hayes but at the system that let him thrive, a system she'd once trusted too blindly. Inside Cell B, Sam sat, back straight, cuffs biting his wrists. He didn't look up as Laura entered, but his eyes met hers, a flicker of recognition, not relief. Laura saw the man who'd rerouted a mission with a single note, and she felt small, not for lack of power but for the weight of what she hadn't prevented. "Mr. Carter," she said, "this ends now." Sam nodded, not in gratitude but acknowledgement, his silence louder than her authority. As she uncuffed him, Laura felt the system stir, not with noise, but with the weight of a man who'd waited for it to catch up. Daniel Hayes stood in the precinct's holding room, the fluorescent light casting sharp shadows across his face. At 38, he'd built his life on control, first on the football field, then behind a badge. Growing up in Eldridge, he'd watched his father, a cop, lose respect to scandal, leaving Daniel desperate to prove himself. The precinct's culture, steeped in unchecked power, rewarded his aggression, but today, facing Samuel Carter, his control felt like sand slipping through his fingers. Sam sat on the concrete floor, cuffs tight, blood crusted on his wrist. His silence wasn't defiance, it was something heavier, like a mirror Hayes couldn't look away from. "Green Beret, huh?" Hayes sneered, circling Sam. What was it, polishing boots for the real soldiers? His voice echoed, but Sam's gaze stayed fixed, not on Hayes but through him, to a place Hayes couldn't touch. The taunt was meant to break Sam, but it cracked something in Hayes instead, a memory of his father's drunken rants about never being enough. Hayes crouched, face inches from Sam's. "You think that patch makes you untouchable? This is my house." Sam's eyes met his, calm, unyielding. "Do you know where I've been?" Sam asked, his voice steady, not accusing but piercing. Hayes blinked, his bravado faltering. He stood, pacing, his boots loud against the concrete. He'd expected anger, fear, anything he could push against, but Sam's stillness was a wall he couldn't climb. It stirred a doubt Hayes hadn't felt since his rookie days, when a mentor warned him, "Power doesn't make you right." Hayes turned off the camera, claiming a glitch, but really to hide from Sam's gaze. He felt exposed, his authority unraveling under the weight of a man who didn't need to speak to be heard. A folded note slipped from Sam's pocket, landing between them, "If I don't leave, open file 7B. Hayes picked it up, his fingers trembling. He wanted to dismiss it as a bluff, but Sam's eyes, those same eyes that had seen jungles, deserts, and loss, told him it wasn't. Hayes shoved the note in his pocket, his heart pounding, not with fear but with the realization that he'd crossed a line he didn't fully understand. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds, 45, stood in the precinct's darkened briefing room, the glow of a monitor casting his shadow long and jagged. He'd served under Samuel Carter in Afghanistan, a young soldier who thought courage was loud until Sam showed him otherwise. In 2006, Mike's reckless call during an ambush cost 2 lives. Sam, then a consultant, pulled his unit out, his voice calm over the comms, "Move west. I'll handle the rest." Mike never forgot Sam's words after, "Choose who stands beside you wisely." The reprimand stung, costing Mike a promotion, but it planted a seed of shame he'd buried under years of precinct loyalty. Now, watching the security footage of Sam cuffed, Mike felt that shame resurface, sharp as shrapnel. Hayes's voice, "Sit, old man," echoed like the orders Mike had ignored in Kandahar. He'd stayed silent today, watching Hayes break Sam's cane, justifying it as just another shift. But Sam's stillness, his unyielding posture, was a judgment Mike couldn't dodge. It reminded him of the medic tent where Sam had handed him a lighter, saying, "Strike it when you need to remember who you are." Mike's hand trembled as he dialed a classified line, one he'd sworn never to use. "Lieutenant Michael Reynolds, Eldridge PD, Protocol A4. Unlawful detainment. Samuel Carter." The voice on the other end was cold, "Vehicles en route." Mike hung up, his chest tight with guilt and resolve. He deleted the precinct's footage log, burned the backup disk, and wrote in his notebook, "I stayed silent once. Not again." He felt the weight of Sam's gaze from years ago, not accusing but expecting better. Mike wasn't redeeming himself, he was finally listening to the man who'd tried to teach him what a uniform should mean. The Eldridge precinct hummed with unease as the FBI's SUVs rolled in, their silent precision louder than any siren. Inside, Agent Laura Bennett's team uncovered a digital trail, Operation Shadow Line, a network of falsified reports, edited body cam footage, and racial profiling directives buried in encrypted servers. Samuel Carter's arrest wasn't a mistake, it was a symptom of a precinct that had turned protection into predation. Laura's jaw tightened as she read the files, each one a betrayal of the oath she'd taken to uphold justice. She thought of her mentor, a black sergeant sidelined for calling out bias, and felt a personal stake in dismantling this machine. Outside, the crowd grew, veterans in faded caps, families clutching signs reading unbroken. A retired nurse, Evelyn Harris, 70, stood among them, her hands trembling as she held a photo of her husband, a Vietnam vet who'd faced similar humiliation. She felt a quiet pride, not in anger but in the collective refusal to look away. Sam's silence had ignited something, a demand for accountability that no press release could smother. Social media buzzed with #Unbroken, veterans sharing stories of being dismissed, their medals questioned, their service reduced to footnotes. Inside the precinct, Sam sat in cell B, his cuffs loosened but his posture unchanged. He didn't speak, but his presence was a catalyst, forcing the system to confront itself. Laura presented Hayes with the warrant, her voice steady. "You detained a man you had no right to touch." Hayes's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of doubt. He felt the ground shift, his authority no longer a shield but a target. The community's vigil, the viral video, Sam's unyielding silence, it all pressed against the precinct's walls, cracking the facade of untouchable power. By nightfall, Lincoln Square was a sea of quiet defiance. Veterans, young and old, stood shoulder to shoulder with civilians, their unbroken pins glinting under streetlights. Evelyn Harris, the retired nurse, held her sign high, "Honor our heroes." Her husband's memory, his stories of being called boy despite his Purple Heart, fueled her presence. She felt a swell of hope, not just for Sam but for every veteran whose service had been erased by indifference. A teenager beside her, Jamal Carter, 15, no relation to Sam, wore a pin his mother had bought online. He'd grown up hearing his grandfather's tales of Vietnam, and Sam's silence felt like a call to stand taller. Letters poured into the FBI, hundreds, then thousands, each one a story of overlooked veterans, of slurs endured in uniform, of medals tucked away in drawers. A child's drawing arrived, showing Sam standing tall, captioned, "He didn't break, so we won't." The sender, Lily Nguyen, 10, was Emily's daughter, who'd watched her mother's broadcast with wide eyes, feeling a spark of pride in her heritage. The community's response wasn't loud, it was deep, rooted in shared pain and a refusal to let Sam's moment fade. Inside the precinct, Mike Reynolds watched the crowd through a window, his badge heavy in his pocket. He thought of Kandahar, of Sam's voice pulling him from chaos, and felt a pang of regret for every time he'd looked away from the precinct's wrongs. He slipped the lighter from his locker, struck it, and watched the flame flicker. Strike it when you need to remember who you are. Mike felt a resolve harden, he'd protect Sam's legacy, even if it meant leaving his own behind. The community's vigil wasn't just for Sam, it was a mirror, showing Eldridge what it could become if it dared to listen. The federal courthouse in Columbus was a slab of marble and silence, its halls echoing with the weight of Samuel Carter's case. Daniel Hayes sat in the defendant's chair, his suit too tight, his jaw clenched. The 16-second video played on a screen, each frame a nail in his defense, the cane snapping, Sam's blood, Clara's cry. The gallery sat still, not out of shock but reverence, as if the silence Sam had wielded now filled the room. Captain Sarah Coleman, 40, took the stand, her JAG uniform crisp, her voice steady. A black veteran who'd served with Sam in the Gulf, she'd faced her own battles with bias, her promotions delayed, her complaints ignored. "I knew Sam Carter," she said, her eyes locking on Hayes. He trained men to survive, not to dominate. You didn't just cuff him, you cuffed every soldier who served without applause. Sarah felt vindication, but also sorrow. No verdict could erase the pain of seeing Sam humiliated, or her own years of fighting a system that diminished her. The prosecution laid out the evidence, doctored logs, buried complaints, a precinct culture that shielded Hayes's aggression. Hayes tried to defend himself. I followed protocol. I kept order. Sarah's voice cut through. You rewrote order to fit your prejudice. The judge's gavel fell. 7 years, no parole, license revoked. Hayes's eyes darted, searching for allies, but found only faces that no longer feared him. Sarah felt no triumph, only a quiet resolve to keep fighting for men like Sam, whose silence had forced the system to speak. The FBI's Integrity First program rolled out quietly, its training manuals featuring a still of Samuel Carter, cuffed yet unbroken. In precincts nationwide, recruits watched the 16-second clip, not for procedure but for principle. The instructor's voice was firm. What do you see? A young officer in Atlanta answered, a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. The program wasn't about reform, it was about recalibration, a reminder that badges mean nothing without integrity. Sam's silence had become a curriculum, his image a mirror for a system too long blind to its flaws. A National Honor Review Board was established, auditing cases of veteran mistreatment. In Eldridge, the precinct's honor wall was stripped of Hayes's name, replaced with a simple plaque, under review. Veterans like Evelyn Harris visited, not to celebrate but to reflect. She felt a quiet hope, knowing her husband's struggles were no longer invisible. Jamal Carter, the teenager, joined a youth program Sam mentored, inspired to carry forward the legacy of resilience. His pin, unbroken, was a badge he wore daily, a reminder of what strength looked like. Sam remained in Eldridge, his porch unchanged, his routine steady. He didn't seek the spotlight, but when a reporter asked if he felt vindicated, he said, "Vindication isn't for me, it's for those who come after." His voice carried the weight of Marcus's loss, of decades spent standing tall despite a world that tried to push him down. The system was listening now, not because it wanted to, but because Sam's silence had left it no choice. In classrooms, in precincts, in quiet moments, his story reshaped what honor meant, one still moment at a time. Samuel Carter stood on his porch, the same scuffed boots on his feet, the same coffee mug in his hand. The invitation from Washington lay unopened on his kitchen table, a gilded request to honor him with a seat at a ceremony, a military escort, a place on a new honor roll for overlooked veterans. He'd read it once, then set it aside. "I didn't do this to be remembered," he wrote back, his handwriting steady. "I did it so others wouldn't be forgotten." He thought of Marcus, his son, whose grave held no medals but all his pride. Sam's fight was for him, for the kids he mentored, for every veteran whose silence had been mistaken for weakness. In Eldridge, the precinct's plaque was remounted, Hayes's name scored through with a single line, a mark that spoke louder than erasure. Children like Lillian Gwynn visited, her crayon drawing of Sam pinned beside it. She felt a spark of purpose, wanting to grow up strong like the man who didn't break. The town had changed, not with fanfare but with a quiet reckoning. Veterans wore unbroken pins, not as protest but as promise. Jamal Carter, now mentoring younger kids, carried Sam's lessons, stay still until they see it. Sam walked to the community center, his new cane tapping softly. He didn't speak of the arrest, the trial, or the FBI. When a boy asked what it meant to be a veteran, Sam pointed to his wrist, the faint scar from the cuffs. "It means you keep going, even when they try to stop you." His voice was calm, but his eyes held a fire that hadn't dimmed. He felt peace, not in applause but in the lives he touched, in the system that had finally paused to listen. The nation moved on, but Sam's story didn't fade. It lived in training rooms, in quiet salutes, in the unbroken pins worn from Ohio to Atlanta. It lived in Mike Reynolds, who'd left the precinct to teach ethics at a community college, his lighter a reminder of Sam's words. It lived in Mia, whose video had sparked a movement, now studying journalism with a scholarship. It lived in Sarah, who fought for veterans' rights, her resolve sharpened by Sam's example. His silence had become a legacy, not of noise but of truth, proving that one man's stillness could move a world. To everyone who walked with Sam's story, thank you. You've stood with us through pain, resilience, and quiet triumph. If this moved you, hit that subscribe button on Revenge Ties and join our community, where every story uncovers a truth worth hearing. Share this with someone who needs to know that dignity doesn't shout, it endures. Like, comment, tell us your story, your voice is part of this reckoning. Keep standing unbroken, and we'll meet you at the next story, where honor always finds its way.